Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. In today's video, we're going to be covering another Mystery Monday and I'm bringing it to you from my bedroom. Switching it up a little bit. I just feel like the bedroom is so much cozier. It feels a lot better to sit down and tell you guys about the case from here. And we have the little emotional Mystery Monday support doggies. Mia's back there, but you can't see her behind Bo's big butt. Also, I didn't realize, but last Monday, the 8th, was actually Mystery Monday's 4th anniversary. I've been doing Mystery Mondays for 4 years now, which is crazy. If you've been around for 4 years, then thanks for sticking around. And I apologize if the lighting changes a bunch, but I'm filming in my room now, so I just am using natural lighting and it's a bit of a gloomy day. There's a lot of clouds out. Anyway, before we get into today's case, I just want to thank today's sponsor, Audible. You guys know by now that I love Audible. I listen to audiobooks every chance I get while I'm cleaning the house. My parents live like 35 minutes away, so I love to listen to audiobooks to and from their house on that drive to fill up the time. There's something about like having someone read to you that is just so therapeutic and soothing, and I just love it. I just finished The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I will say is like the slightest bit of a slow start, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I would definitely recommend it to you, and I'm about to start The Woman in the Window, which my friend has been recommending forever. It's a thriller mystery, so it's right up my alley. If you guys are watching Mystery Mondays, and I'm sure it's right up your alley as well, being a mystery. But I'm really excited to listen to it, and I will keep you updated and let you know how it goes. Audible is actually giving members even more now with Plus Catalog, which has thousands of audiobooks, podcasts, guided meditations, workouts, sleep tracks, Audible originals, all included with your membership, which is amazing. And you can also check it all out with a 30-day free trial if you go to audible.com/bellafiore, or you can also text bellafiore to 500-500. If you guys are interested, I will leave all of the information in the description down below for you to check out. And let's go ahead and talk about this case. So today we're going to be talking about the case of the Gonzales family, and this case is crazy from start to finish. There is so much weirdness in it, so I'm really excited to hear your thoughts about the whole situation in the comments down below. Teodoro Gonzales was born in 1954 in Baguio, which is a city in the Philippines. It's about 250 kilometers north of the capital city, which is Manila. Teodoro was the fourth child of the tight-knit Gonzales family. He went by the nickname Teddy, and he was known to have a super strong work ethic. He worked really hard in school and eventually got into law school and passed the bar. In 1977, when Teddy was around 23 years old, he met another student, which was 18-year-old Mary Claridatis, who went by her middle name Loiva. Loiva was the eldest of 6 children. She was known to be a gentle, delicate woman who was pretty soft-spoken, and she and Teddy hit it off right away, and within a few months they were married. In 1980, they gave birth to their first child, a son named Seth Gonzalez. Apparently there was like a really special meaning and story behind Seth's name, but they wanted to save it for his 21st birthday. 3 years later, in 1983, they gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Claudine Gonzales. So like I mentioned, Teddy was known for having like a really strong work ethic. He was always working towards his goals and trying to get ahead in his career. He just really wanted to provide his children with a happy and stable life, and he didn't want them to have to worry about their financial situation ever, like him and Loiva had to do when they were growing up. After completing his law degree, he and Loiva ended up working together in real estate and then property development, and they also owned a video store and a pharmacy together. In 1989, they built and opened a hotel called the Queen Victoria Hotel in Baguio. It was a 4-story, 40-bedroom hotel, which was also home to the Gonzales family. Unfortunately, the very next year, in July of 1990, the hotel collapsed in the Luzon earthquake, and luckily the family made it out to safety, except for Seth. He was trapped under the rubble. Teddy was like this massive hero. He went in, he saved him from under the rubble, and everybody was okay. After the incident though, the family decided to relocate to New South Wales right here in Australia. When they got there, immediately Teddy got to work. He went back to law school so he could practice in Australia, and then after finishing law school, he opened his own law firm called T. Gonzales and Associates, where he worked as an immigration lawyer. The law firm ended up being pretty successful and the business was thriving, so Loiva and Teddy went and bought a block of land at number 6 Collins Street in North Ryde, which I don't know about now, but at the time it was like an upper middle class sort of suburb. And it was there that they built a very nice and a very spacious spacious house. The Gonzales family was known to be close-knit, but Teddy and Loiva were both devout Christians and they were also kind of strict parents. They had pretty high expectations of their children, but it came from a place of wanting their children to succeed because they didn't want them to struggle like they did in their childhoods. They were also pretty generous parents. They gave Seth a car, they gave Seth and Claudine an allowance so that they didn't have to work and they could just focus on their studies and their grades. They also planned to eventually sell their house so that they could buy both Seth and Claudine a house of their own, which is crazy. Very generous. But if the children didn't live up to their expectations, if they didn't do well in school, if they got a boyfriend or whatever, they would threaten to take things away from them. They would punish them pretty harshly, threaten to disinherit them, threaten to take away their allowance, threaten to take away their car, that sort of thing. Seth went to Parramatta High School and he didn't do so hot in school. He just wasn't really interested. He had a real passion for singing and music, which is where he put a lot of his attention. Teddy and Loiva didn't love this. They wanted him to basically drop the singing altogether and wanted him to get into law or medicine, which he did. When he graduated from high school, he went on to study medical science at the University of New South Wales, which his parents were really happy about. They thought it would lead him into med school, but he wasn't doing too hot again. He just wasn't interested and just wanted to focus on his music. He was part of a band called Definite Vibes and they kind of toured nightclubs and hosted dance parties and they actually made some decent money off it. They had some fans. Seth actually had an entire fan page dedicated to him. The fan page was run by a girl named Daisy Diaz and this is the intro that she had on the webpage. It read, "Hi, in case you stumbled on here by accident, I'm Daisy Diaz and I wrote this page for my best friend Seth. Remember that he's a sweetie and a true best friend. Besides being caring, trustworthy, cute, adorable, kind, understanding, intelligent, and can sing in a way that makes a girl's heart melt. And if you mess with him, you mess with me." She would post a bunch of photos of him. She posted photos of him performing on stage. There was a photo of him like lying across the laps of a bunch of models. There was a photo of him shirtless, like a photo shoot that he did, and it was captioned "Steam, steam, baby face." Very sexy. She also wrote like a bunch of posts about him and how much she loved him and how dedicated she was to him, and she would dedicate like song lyrics to him and that sort of thing. And one of her posts read, "Every time I close my eyes, I thank the Lord that I got you, babe, and you got me too. Some people think there's no such thing as a dream, decent guy. Well, in my eyes, you prove them wrong, Seffy. If you ever stop being my friend, I would be so incomplete." Despite all of this, despite the money he was making, his parents wanted him to focus on his studies instead. He ended up dropping medical science after 2 years and instead enrolled in law at Macquarie University, following in his father's footsteps. He was doing a lot better, he was getting good grades, and his father actually hired him to work at his law firm as a paralegal and for IT assistance as well. And they also bought him a green Ford Festiva with the personalized number plate SEF G80 because they were so proud of him and how well he was doing. Claudine was also doing very well at school. She was a very outgoing girl. She was very talkative, always the life of the conversation. She loved sports and cooking, and she hoped to become a teacher when she was older. She ended up dating this 19-year-old guy named Chris, which Teddy and Loiva were not loving. They thought he was a bad influence. They thought that he would distract her from her studies, so they ended up sending her off to Melbourne to live with an aunt to study there and kind of separate them so she could focus on her studies. And while she was over there, her and Chris actually kept up a long distance relationship until Seth got involved. He messaged Chris this really like threatening email, basically said, "I'm in a gang, frick off." I mean, from everything I've read, Seth was known to be this like baby-faced, 5'4", super innocent looking guy, so whatever he said must have been pretty convincing to make Chris end his relationship with Claudine. Claudine was pissed, right, of course, so she ended up telling her parents the secret that Seth had confided in her. His parents were under the impression he was doing really well in his law degree, right? But turns out he was failing all 4 of his classes and was falsifying his reports so that his parents would think that he was doing well, and he kind of boasted about this to Claudine, like, ha ha ha, they have no idea. So Claudine told Teddy and Loiva to get back at Seth, and understandably they were pissed. He also had a girlfriend who was 4 years older than him, which Teddy and Loiva didn't approve of. They thought she was a massive distraction, a bad influence, and so they threatened to take his beloved car off him. They threatened to disinherit him. So Seth and his girlfriend broke up, and according to his girlfriend, like, she didn't think that they were serious at all. She ended up moving on straight away, going back to her ex, but Seth was like, obsessed with her. He thought he was in love with her, he thought they would get back together eventually, and he even went as far as to buy her an engagement necklace. So now we're at the 10th of July in 2001, which is the day of the murders. The day was just like any normal day for the Gonzales family, which I don't even know why I bother saying anymore because it's always how these things go. It's always just a normal day until something horribly tragic happens. It was school holidays, so Claudine was back home visiting her parents and her family, and she was studying all day because she actually had to go back to Melbourne in 2 days to go back to school. Teddy and Loiva left for work early in the morning in separate cars. Seth went to university in the morning. He then went to his father's law office to help them with some IT issues they were having, and then he had plans later that night to see his friend Sam Delio. He picked Sam up from his house at around 8 p.m. and they went into the city together. They had dinner at Planet Hollywood and then went to the Galaxy World arcade, and they were done by about 11 p.m. Seth dropped Sam home and then he went home himself to Collins Street. He got home at around 11:30 to 11:45 p.m. and upon entering the house, he discovered the bodies of his murdered family members. He frantically called 000 at around 11:48 p.m. to tell them that he had found his parents in their home and that they had been shot.
Someone has shot my parents. I think they're all bleeding. They're on the floor. I can't find my sister. Please hurry.
And your parents are both being shot, have they?
I don't know. There's not a blood.
After calling 000, he then ran to his next door neighbor John's house, and from outside he was just yelling at him, banging on the door, trying to get him to wake up. John was woken up by the commotion, and so was another neighbor named Shane Hanley. They both rushed outside and they were met by Seth, who was sobbing hysterically.
This is John, please help me. Look what's happened to my family.
Seth pulled him towards the house, screaming and crying.
He tried to take me in, I couldn't hold him.
John immediately ran back inside to call the police, but Shane stayed with Seth to try and comfort him, and as he was trying to comfort him, Seth all of a sudden got up and was like, oh my god, I can give them CPR, I know CPR, and he ran back into the house. Shane followed him, but after seeing his parents' bodies, he knew that there was no point even trying CPR. 46-year-old Teddy Gonzales was lying on the floor in the foyer of the house, blood was pooled around him, and 43-year-old Loiva could be seen nearby in the living area. Blood also pooled around her, groceries scattered around her as if she had been carrying them when she was attacked. Seth was running to and from his mother and father, crying hysterically and calling out to them. Shane was worried that the killer would still be in the house, so he managed to get Shane outside and went to his own house to call 000 again, and he stayed on the line with them until he could hear sirens in the street. When police and paramedics arrived, armed police first went into the building to make sure that it was secure and that the killers were not there anymore. Upon entering the house, they found the bodies of Teddy and Loiva Gonzales in the ground floor of the home. When they made their way upstairs, they found the body of 18-year-old Claudine. She was lying in the fetal position in her room with blood pooled around her, and a red jumper had been placed over her to hide the brutality of her attack. None of the victims had been shot as initially suspected, as Seth had said on his 000 call, but they had actually been brutally stabbed instead. Teddy suffered 12 injuries, most of them in his upper body. His lungs and heart had been penetrated, his carotid artery, his jugular, and his spine had been severed. Defensive wounds were also found on his arms and his hands, indicating that he had tried to fight his attacker off. Loiva had sustained injuries to her face, back, chest, abdomen, and groin, and she also had defensive wounds on her arms and her hands. She also had a 6-centimeter laceration across her throat which severed her windpipe, but due to the lack of active bleeding, it was determined that this happened post-mortem. Claudine's murder was the most brutal. She was bludgeoned as well with a heavy object which was believed to be a baseball bat. Her skull was fractured, and there were also dents on the walls and the roof, which is what indicated that it was a baseball bat that had been used to create these injuries. Claudine had also been strangled and stabbed and had 5 stab wounds to her neck and 2 to her torso. It was determined that she was murdered at around 4 p.m. She had study books open on her desk, which indicated that she was studying at the time and didn't see it coming. Loiva left work at around 4:50 p.m. with a colleague who she dropped off on her way home, and it seems like after she dropped this colleague off, she must have got some groceries because she was found with a bag of groceries on the floor around her. Soon after arriving home, she was confronted by the killer, who murdered her in the living room of the house. Teddy left work at around 6:20 p.m. and it seems that he actually did try and call home twice on his drive, but both calls went unanswered. He was killed immediately upon entering the front door. Inside the house, the attacker also left some racist graffiti. It was written in blue spray paint on their wall in their living area. As officers were looking through the house, Seth, who was the only surviving member of his immediate family, was sitting outside. He was hunched over, he was crying hysterically and requested some rosary beads. When he explained to police on the scene the discovery of his parents' body, he said that he'd seen 1 or 2 people fleeing southward from the house and that he tried to chase them, but they were too far and he couldn't reach them. Police asked him, if there was anybody who would want to hurt his family, if there were any incidents he could think of that had happened recently that may explain what had happened to his family, and he told them about something that had actually happened just the night before. He said that he and his parents were driving home from Claudine's 18th birthday dinner and they got into a road rage incident, and the driver of the other car drove past them and yelled out "bloody Asians" at them. Obviously, because of this and the racist graffiti that was found in the house, police considered the aspect of a racially motivated crime. There were also some indications of a robbery in the house. Loiva's handbag and Teddy's briefcase both had been rummaged through and all of the stuff from inside had been scattered around. The cord to the home phone had been cut, which is why when Teddy was calling home, neither of the calls were answered. A bunch of the wardrobe doors had been left open, indicating that somebody had been looking through them. Loiva actually also had a bunch of dogs. She had like 5 or 6 little dogs who always barked whenever somebody came to the house. But the killer obviously must have known this and restrained the dogs in a room, and they were unharmed. From the get-go though, police believed that the house had actually just been staged to look like a robbery, that there was actually no robbery involved. Nothing expensive or of value had been taken from the house. Loiva's jewelry was all still there. Teddy had like $700 in his wallet that hadn't been touched. Loiva had like $300 in her wallet that hadn't been touched either. The wardrobes that had their doors open also from the inside looked seemingly undisturbed. And the blood spatter around Teddy and Loiva's bodies actually indicated that their stuff that had been scattered around them was purposefully placed there after the murders. In the kitchen, one of the fly screens above the sink had actually been removed, slashed, and thrown outside, but there were no footprints on the kitchen counter, which is to be expected if this was the entry point of the house. It seems as though whoever the killer was just set this up to further the robbery break-in angle. The fact that the murders took place over a few hours as well, between 4 and 7 p.m, also indicated this wasn't just some rash like break-in robbery, because the killer would have had to lay there and wait for each member of the family to get home in order to kill them. There was fresh water on the bathroom tiles, which was determined to have been from after the murders took place, so whoever the killer was showered, rinsed off after the final murder of Teddy Gonzales, and took their time. They weren't in a rush. They didn't immediately flee. The murder weapons, as I had already mentioned, were determined to be a baseball bat, but also 2 knives, and the knives were actually determined to have been from the Gonzales family's kitchen. They had this knife block. 2 of the knives were missing. Police went out and found the exact knife block, and one of the 2 knives that was missing from the knife block at the home was determined to be a perfect match for the murders. So this was definitely a weird thing for somebody who came and was so patient and waited for each member of the family to get home. They didn't come very prepared. Like, if you planned a hate crime or a home invasion, wouldn't you bring your own weapons? I mean, you'd also have to hope that when you got there was nobody there, because you need time to look around for what weapons you're going to take from their house in order to murder them. It just seems like a bit of a gamble. Besides the kitchen window, which seemed to be staged to look like a point of entry, there was actually no signs of a break-in, meaning police were looking for somebody who knew the family or had access to the house. Bloody shoe prints were also found throughout the house, but they didn't belong to anybody who had entered the scene, not neighbors, not paramedics, officers, Seth, victims, nobody. The shoe prints were identified as a UK size 7, and they were the human brand running laceless shoes. Police went and questioned the neighbors, but nobody had heard anything suspicious. No screams, no yelling, no arguments, nothing out of the ordinary, but it also was like quite a windy, thundery, raining, loud night, which probably didn't help. Police dogs were also brought to the scene, but they didn't manage to pick up on a scent. So the next day, on the 11th of July, Seth was brought into the police station to give an official written statement. He said he went to uni in the morning. He then went to his dad's law office to help out with some IT stuff. He left at around 4 p.m. because he had plans to meet his friend Sam at 5, but then his friend Sam ended up postponing till around 8 p.m. So he went home from his dad's law office. He tried to call his mom, he tried tried to call the home phone. Both calls went unanswered. He got home at around 6 p.m. and he thought that nobody was home. There were no lights on. It was really quiet, no movement, and it was also raining. So he was just sitting in his car waiting for the rain to subside before he would go inside. Eventually, he decided not to go inside at all. His friend had just gotten a new house in Kingsford, which is like 30 minutes away. So he decided to go and visit this friend. But the weird thing about this was that he didn't have this friend's number. He didn't have this friend's address. So he just was like apparently driving around aimlessly looking for the house until eventually it got to like 8 p.m. and he was like, oh, I've got to go pick my friend up. So he went and picked Sam up at 8:15 p.m. and as I already mentioned earlier in the video, they got dinner at Planet Hollywood, went to an arcade after. Seth then went home, got home at around 11:45 p.m. which is when he discovered his parents' bodies. By the 13th of July, the media had picked up on the case and it was just going crazy. Seth held a press conference. He offered a $100,000 reward for any information that could lead to the killer's whereabouts.
The best way I could possibly describe my father is that he was my hero and role model. He believed that there was no limit to what he could do for his family, friends. I admired him in every way possible, and my greatest aim in life was to one day become at least half the man that he was. My mother was the heart of my family. She was the heart of her friends and anyone who knew her. We have always confided in each other as best of friends, and she made it seem that nothing was impossible. My sister was the life in the family. She was an expert on smiling and made us all believe that life should be taken lightly. She had always told me that I was more talented than her and that she looked up to me. I had always replied to that with a smile. I never got the chance to tell her that I looked up to her.
It is difficult to explain the love and ties in my family, but if you were to picture the four corners of the world, in my world, we were the four. The three corners of my world are now gone. My family, friends, and myself would like to ask anyone out there to please help us. Now, because the case was blowing up in the media, there was a bunch of speculation, a bunch of rumors about who could have done something like this. There were rumors about Teddy's legal business, saying that he might have been a little corrupt and involved in some shady stuff. People were speculating that he had ties to a local criminal gang and that they had murdered the three of them to send a message. There were obviously also rumors about this being a hate crime after pictures circulated of the racist graffiti in the living room. People basically thought that they were like this upper middle class family, that they must have been doing something shady in order for somebody to get some sort of revenge. It came out that in the late 1990s, Teddy had come under the radar of the Department of Immigration for allegedly helping Filipino immigrants lie on their documents seeking refuge in Australia. And he was actually charged with 4 counts of falsifying documents. He did go to trial, but he was cleared of all charges. He also apparently upset a few people by keeping the money that they had paid him, despite the fact that their visa applications had been denied. In 2001, a colleague overheard him in his office on a really heated phone call. He ended up yelling out, "Fuck you," before slamming the phone down, which was super out of character for him. He ended up telling this colleague that he was in the middle of trying to sell a property to an investor in the Philippines and that it just wasn't going right, and this person ended up threatening to kill his entire family, which is a little crazy, but Teddy didn't seem to be too fazed by the threat. I guess the investor was in the Philippines, so it just seemed like it was an empty threat. So on the same day as the press conference and the media frenzy, so the 13th of July, Seth actually also went to his dad's accountant trying to get all of his inheritance. Their estate in Australia was worth $1.5 million, and then back in the Philippines, they also had an estate worth $1.3 million, so it was a lot of inheritance. And Seth was the sole beneficiary of it all now that both his parents and his sister had been murdered. He couldn't access the inheritance at the time. I'm under the impression inheritance take a few weeks to come through anyway. I don't know what the deal is with inheritance. If the people whose inheritance it is have been murdered, might take a little bit longer. But either way, he didn't get the inheritance. The funeral for Teddy, Loiva and Claudine was held on the 20th of July at the Holy Spirit Catholic Church in North Ryde, and there was about 300 people there, colleagues, clients of the office, friends, family, school friends, and law enforcement who were still investigating. Seth got up to give his eulogy and spoke about how he would never know the backstory of his name because his father wouldn't be around to tell him on his 21st birthday. He said, "I will never find out the meaning of my name because it was taken away along with my father. That part of me will always be incomplete." And then, after the eulogy, he ended up singing a solo a cappella version of One Sweet Day by Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men, and
sorry, I never told you all I wanted to say. Now it's...
There were some mixed feelings about this. Some people felt really sorry for him, and then most people, I think, thought it was just like really bizarre, because it is. was. So police aren't really getting anywhere with the case. They're not getting any leads. The theories that they've played with aren't really making any sense. You know, the racially motivated crime, the robbery, neither makes sense. So they start looking into those closest to the family. And they look into Seth. He was acting really strange in the days following the murders, so police were definitely a little sus on him, and there were definitely some holes in his alibi. There were times he couldn't be accounted for, times that couldn't be corroborated in his alibi. There was CCTV footage of him with Sam at Planet Hollywood at the arcade from, 8 till 11 p.m. His friend Sam said that while they were out, he wasn't really eating that much. Apparently he was still recovering from a small bout of food poisoning that he and his mum both got. His mum had it way more severe. She actually had to be hospitalized overnight because of it. Seth also continuously asked Sam all throughout the night if he could borrow his phone to call his family's home phone because it was engaged. Apparently he called like every 15 minutes and it was engaged the entire time. So that was accounted for, but the time during the actual murders from 4 to 7 p.m, he couldn't be accounted for. Seth said that before he met up with Sam that he drove around aimlessly looking for a house that he didn't know the address of for a friend that he didn't have the phone number of. Not only is that weird, but there's no one to corroborate it, and in fact there was actually people to corroborate the opposite. Like I mentioned earlier, Seth had a pretty distinctive green car with a personalized number plate. One of Teddy's clients was interviewed and he said he stopped by the house at around 4:10 to 4:30 p.m, which is around the time Claudine was murdered. He said he was there just dropping some documents into the Gonzales' letterbox, but while he was there, he noticed the green Ford Festiva was there. Loiva's sister, so Seth's aunt, Emily Luna, also visited the house at around 6 p.m. She was on her way home after picking up her son and she just decided to pay her sister a little bit of a visit. When she got to the house, it looked like nobody was home. There was no lights on. It was pretty quiet. There was no movement. Seth's green Ford Festiva was there, parked out front of the house, which kind of lines up with what he said. He said he was home at around that time, but he said that it was raining and that he didn't get out of the car, and he left shortly after. But when Emily was there was nobody in his car and it wasn't raining, which she distinctively remembers because she knew that she didn't have to get an umbrella out for her and her son to walk up to the house. Emily went up to the front door, she rang the doorbell, nobody answered, and over the next 5 minutes she intermittently rang the doorbell and got no answer. There was a window next to the front door, and when Emily peeked inside, she saw that there was like somebody there wearing a jacket and a baseball cap, but her son reassured her, "Mum, that's nobody, it's not a real person, it's just their coat rack." So she decided, he's right, it's probably just a coat rack. She decided to go around the side of the house to knock on the door around the side of the house, enter that way. But as she started walking around the side of the house, she just got a really uneasy feeling, decided not to go any further, grabbed her son, got in the car, and they left. There was also a bunch of other really sketchy coincidences regarding Seth as well. When paramedics and police first arrived on the scene on the 10th of July, the day of the murders, Seth had called the police, neighbors had called the police, Seth was crying hysterically. However, his face was completely dry. There was not a single tear shed by Seth. Like, despite putting on the works, the full theatrics, he couldn't produce a single tear. When police were searching the house that day and Seth was outside with another officer, he actually said to the officer that he felt really uncomfortable because they were searching the house, which meant they were going to search his room, and he had purchased a porn video, which he had in his drawers, and he was just feeling really embarrassed about it. The police officer that he told this to felt really uncomfortable about this because he was like, "Why do you care if they find a porn video when your entire family is in there murdered?" He also told police that after he discovered his parents' bodies that he went in and tried to give them CPR. But he only had the smallest amount of blood on him. He had like a little bit on his jeans, like a few spots on his jeans, a few spots on his boots, and a little spot on the sleeve of his jumper. But given how much blood was found at the scene of the crime and around his parents' bodies, there's no way he could have gone in there and given them CPR and not gotten blood all over himself. Like, it just didn't add up. He tried to explain this away in the dumbest way. He said, oh, it's raining today. I went outside, the rain washed the rest of the blood off me, and then I cleaned my hands on the wet grass, which literally doesn't make any sense. He also had some blue colored staining on the sleeve of his jumper, which later analysis showed that it was blue paint, much like the blue paint that was used to graffiti the racial slurs on the wall of the house. In his bedroom wardrobe, they also found a shoebox for UK size 7 human brand running laceless shoes. The box was empty and the shoes were nowhere to be found, and Seth tried to explain this away, saying like, oh, those aren't my shoes. My dad actually bought them for my cousin in the Philippines, which again doesn't make any sense. Because if you were going to send them to someone in the Philippines, wouldn't you send them with the box? Like, why would you keep the box and just like take the shoes out and send the shoes? It doesn't even make any sense. His friend Sam said that Seth kept a baseball bat in the boot of his car in case he ever needed to defend himself, and if you remember, the murder weapons were 2 knives from the kitchen and a baseball bat, none of which have ever been recovered. And the baseball bat was missing from Seth's car. So at this point, police are definitely sus on Seth, but they don't have any like solid evidence against him. So they ask him to come down to the station and do a full reenactment of the night of July 10th. When he described finding the bodies of his family members, he didn't seem distressed. He was very calm. He didn't seem to be upset at all, retelling and reliving that moment. He reiterated the night to police. He told them again how he saw 2 people fleeing from the scene and tried to chase them. So police decided to reenact this, see if it was possible, if he was telling the truth. They went to the house and they were able to determine that by the time Seth exited the house through the garage, the 2 people who he was trying to chase wouldn't have even been in sight. So it seemed like just another lie. They asked him about the baseball bat that his friend Sam said he kept in his boot, and he said, I don't have that anymore and I don't know what happened to it. They then interviewed his family and friends to get a better idea of who Seth was and what he was like. And through these interviews, they found out that he is literally just like a pathological liar. He had told friends and family and acquaintances all of these like crazy stories that just weren't true. He said he was an expert in Taekwondo and he ran his own security company, that he was a world champion kickboxer, a PT, a lawyer, that he owned property and he had to travel to New York for all these like crazy meetings and to negotiate business deals. He said he was the manager of a boy band, that he was a music producer, that he had his own record deal, that he was a modeling agent or owned his own modeling agency. He actually told everyone at one point that he had cancer and then later told them that he had beaten cancer, that he was in remission. It also turned out that his fan page, run by Daisy Diaz, I'll give you a minute for this one. I'm sure you can guess who it was actually run by. If you said Seth, you were correct. A family friend actually once accused him of stealing money from her wallet, and when his parents confronted them, he didn't even deny it, just said that he was an opportunist. And Teddy and Loiva honestly weren't surprised when they found out either, because they had suspicions that he had been stealing from their wallets as well, even though they gave both him and Claudine an allowance. Police also learned that at the time of the murder, he had a very tumultuous relationship with his parents, despite the fact that they were seen to be a very close-knit family, which I spoke about earlier. You know, they were threatening to take his car away, threatening to disinherit him, but it actually gets worse, would you believe it? After the murder of his parents and sister, he was actually awarded $15,000 from the government as part of a victims of crime compensation payment. The $15,000 was actually meant to help pay for his family's funerals, to help pay for his living expenses, considering his family weren't around anymore. But since his parents had been murdered, he had started driving his mum's car and decided to spend the $15,000 to pimp it out a little bit. Meanwhile, Seth was actually trying to paint himself as the victim. A little bit more compulsive lying, you know? He tried to tell police that a hit had been taken out on his family from one of their business rivals in the Philippines. He said that he believed they spared one of the family members to serve as a scapegoat, and that he was in fear of his life, that they would come back for him as well. He was kind of just running with that call that his father had gotten previously that was overheard by a colleague, when his father said that somebody in the Philippines had threatened to murder him and his family. Despite the fact that the only evidence of that call is the colleague's word that Teddy had said that that's what happened on the call. Police were leaving no stone unturned, so they were checking out every lead. They checked this one out too, but there were no business rivals who had enough to gain from murdering the family. In August of 2001, Seth went to police and handed them an anonymous email that he had received. The email was written in a mixture of English and Tagalog, and it basically said they paid for 3, there was supposed to be 3, you're just lucky you weren't there. So Seth was convinced that his life was still in danger, and he got his friends to start acting as his bodyguards. Police actually later seized Seth's computer and found drafts for this email on his computer which indicated that he had sent it to himself. Would you believe it? In September of 2001, Seth told his family members that he had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. He contacted his Aunt Annie from the Philippines, and she was the one who ran all of Teddy's investment properties over in the Philippines, and he basically asked her for $190,000 to help with his surgery for his brain tumor to save his life. She was like, okay, that's sus. She didn't pay it, and instead she went and told the police. The next month, so we're in October now, he sold his parents' cars, his mother's jewelry for $88,000. He then put a $5,000 deposit down on a $175,000 Lexus, which he told them he would pay the rest off once he got his inheritance. But eventually he had to cancel the Lexus because he didn't have the money, obviously. Instead, he went and bought a more affordable car, and he got a personalized number plate again that read TLCS, which is the initials for all of his immediate family members: Teddy, Loiva, Claudine, and Seth. He also moved into a new apartment in Chatswood. All of the furniture was from his parents' old house. And his rent and build were paid for by his family members because he told them that the police told him to relocate because he was in danger, which again wasn't true. By January of 2002, Seth was made aware that investigators didn't buy his original alibi. And Seth didn't know this, but they had actually also bugged his phone, so they were listening to all of his calls and recording all of his calls. They also had an undercover officer trying to befriend him. Seth was at a coffee shop when a stranger complimented him on his clothes, and they struck up a conversation. They were talking. The stranger, who was actually an undercover officer, was like, I'm in a gang. And Seth was like, oh rad, I'm in a gang too, called the White Dragons, which again was a lie, it's not a real gang. But this officer told Seth that he had a friend in prison who was on his deathbed who would be willing to confess to the murders for him. It seemed at first like Seth was considering this because he drew a floor plan of his family's home and he pinpointed and marked where each of his family members were murdered. When police compared Seth's handwriting from this drawing to the racist graffiti found in the house, it was actually a pretty close match. Seth actually also provided time of death for each family member in this drawing, which is something that nobody knew except for the killer and police, because they specifically hadn't released this information because they knew it was something only the killer would know. So anyway, Seth decided not to go ahead with this gangster's offer of his friend on a deathbed admitting to the murders and decided to just plead innocence and continued with this story that it was a business rival who had murdered his family. Then on the 10th of January in 2002, Seth called a friend still having no idea that his calls were being recorded. He told his friend that his original alibi was a lie, but that he had a new alibi that police couldn't possibly dispute. So after this, police confronted him about his alibi, and Seth was like, yeah, look, my first alibi was a lie. I actually was at a brothel that night. He said he didn't tell them originally because he was embarrassed. He didn't want to bring shame to his family because they still thought that he was a virgin. So according to Seth, what actually happened that night was he left his father's law office at around 4 p.m, went home, dropped his car home, went to a local petrol station. From the petrol station, he got a taxi to a brothel in Chatswood because he didn't want anyone to recognize his car near a brothel. He actually claimed that the sex worker refused his payment, would not at all let him pay because the sex was just too good. He says he then went to Chatswood train station, got a taxi from there to home, got in his car, and then went and picked up his friend Sam. Now, because police had bugged his phone, they saw that he was trying to contact a bunch of sex workers and a bunch of brothels in the North Shore area, and he had also been contacting this taxi driver. So police went and contacted this taxi driver themselves, and he was like, yep, I did drop him off at a brothel in Chatswood on the 10th of July. And then police told him, we're questioning you in relation to a triple homicide, right? And immediately the taxi driver was like, wow, okay, he told me it was just in relation to a misdemeanor or I never would have gone ahead with this. He contacted me on the 12th of January in 2002, so 5 months after the murder, and he offered $50 in order for me to say that on the 10th of July in 2001, I dropped him off at a brothel in Chatswood. And the only reason he had agreed to do it is because Seth had told him it wasn't in relation to anything serious, it was just in relation to a misdemeanor. By April, police actually got in contact with the sex worker that he claimed to have slept with as well, and turns out she wasn't even working on the 10th of July. So his alibi was a lie, but we already knew that. On the 30th of May in 2002, Seth contacted police. He said there was a break-in at his apartment that he had been staying in Chatswood. He also told them about 2 threatening emails he had received, one of which said, "Make it easy on yourself, confess now, your father deserved to die, don't talk to any reporters." There was no evidence to suggest there had been a break-in as Seth claimed there was, and they also traced the 2 emails back to an internet cafe, but there was no CCTV footage there, so they couldn't determine who had sent them. But I'm willing to bet it was probably Seth. If I had to take a gamble. So after this, Seth started offering to talk to journalists, but he was like charging them out the arse, saying that he needed the money because his safety was in danger. He then realized it looked a little bit shady to be trying to charge reporters out the arse to have an interview with him about his murdered family members, so he then agreed to do a free interview with Cara Lawrence from the Daily Telegraph. In this interview, he said that his apartment had been broken into and he believed that his family's killers were responsible. Then at 8:30 p.m. that night, the same night as the interview, Seth was found lying in a gutter in Chatswood with a plastic bag next to him. He was taken to the hospital and he told doctors that he was really disoriented, like he didn't even know his own name or where he was, what was going on. After police arrived at the hospital to question him about it, he said that somebody had pulled him into their car while he was walking down the street, put a plastic bag over his head, and then hit him in the head with a piece of wood. They then told him to withdraw the reward money and to stop talking to reporters, and if he didn't do as they asked, that there would be consequences, especially for his grandma. Doctors, however, couldn't find any injuries. There was no evidence to suggest that he had been hit in the head with anything, let alone a piece of wood. No reason why he should be disoriented either. Now, this really worried the police because not only did they suspect that he had murdered all 3 of his immediate family members, but now he's apparently lying about this thing that happened to him, and his grandmother has been threatened, so they're worried for her safety. They were worried that he would put her in harm's way just to deflect any suspicion from himself. So on the 13th of June in 2002, police executed a search warrant of Seth's apartment and charged him with 3 counts of murder. Seth pled not guilty, but bail was refused. He tried to get access to his parents' estate in order to fund his defense, which was denied. The trial started in April of 2004, and it came out at trial that this murder had actually been months in the making, that he had been planning this for some time and originally planned to kill his family by poisoning them. Now, during an earlier search of the Gonzales family home, they found Seth's computer and had seized it and had looked through it since. And they found a bunch of shady stuff in his search history. In the months leading up to the murders, they found that he had been searching for poisons that could easily be disguised in food. He made a purchase of 2 types of seeds from a US distributor, which were delivered in early July, and one of these seeds was a castor oil seed, which is actually poisonous once ingested. Seth, would you have guessed it, denied ever making these searches. He said that Teddy must have been searching for them to make sure he didn't plant anything poisonous in the garden. However, police actually found a vial of clear liquid taped underneath his desk in the family home. When they tested the liquid, they found that it was actually derived from one of the seeds that he ordered and was deadly if consumed. As I mentioned earlier, in the days leading up to the murders, Loiva experienced some really bad abdominal pains, a really bad fever. She was feeling really unwell and she had to be taken to the hospital. At the hospital, she told them it must have been from some undercooked food that she'd eaten. Seth backed her up, said that he was feeling a little bit unwell as well. So at the hospital, they were like, okay, well, you must have food poisoning. They kept her in overnight and discharged her the next day. Little did they know it was actually from Seth trying to poison his mother. When Seth was arrested, they took his fingerprints, mugshot, all of that sort of thing that they do when they arrest somebody usually. But when they entered his fingerprints into the database, they actually got a match they didn't even know they were looking for. His fingerprints were found on a letter that was sent to a food manufacturer in early July of 2001. The letter basically said the manufacturer's products have been contaminated with deadly poison, that they're now on supermarket shelves, and this is what you get for treating your employees badly. Australian Federal Police and Australian Quarantine Inspection and Services also received similar letters basically saying they were from concerned employees from this manufacturer and that they had received a tip-off that some of the food had been poisoned. All 3 letters, plus an online search history on Seth's computer for the addresses for all 3 places that received the letters, was found on Seth's computer. Police believed that they were part of his initial plan to poison his family, and this was just him trying to offset any blame and trying to redirect any suspicion away from himself. And so he was also charged with threatening product contamination. So what really happened the day of the murders is Seth went to uni in the morning, he then went to his father's law office, and he finished at his father's law office at around 4:10 or 4:30 p.m. and headed home. When he got home, he grabbed the baseball bat from the back of his car and 2 knives from the family kitchen. He then went up to his sister's room and attacked her using the baseball bat and one of the knives. And her murder was extremely brutal. It's believed Seth murdered her so that he would be the sole beneficiary of the will, but that her murder was so brutal because he was pissed off at her for telling their parents about the fact that he was falsifying his report cards. He then covered his sister's body with a red jumper to hide the brutality of the attack and laid in wait for his parents to get home one by one. When Loiva got home at around 6 p.m, he attacked her and stabbed her when she entered the living space of the home. He then laid in wait in the foyer for his father to get home, and during this waiting period is when his auntie Emily Luna visited the house, and the figure that she saw that her son convinced her was just the coat rack was actually Seth, and he was wearing a coat and a baseball hat. Teddy Gonzales got home at around 7 p.m. and was murdered immediately upon entering the home. After the murders, Seth had a shower and he then staged the scene to look like a racially motivated break-in robbery crime. He graffitied the walls and got some of the blue spray paint on his jumper, which, as I mentioned, police confirmed previously that it was in fact blue spray paint on his jumper. Well, police actually went back, did a further analysis of that, and were able to determine that it was an exact match to the paint that was used to graffiti the house. After staging the scene, he then left in his car with the baseball bat, the knives, the clothes he was wearing, the shoes he was wearing, and the spray paint cans, and he went and disposed of all of those, and they have never been recovered. And he then went and met up with his friend Sam as if he didn't just murder his entire family. It's believed he murdered his family in order to gain his inheritance, and also because he was mad at them because they threatened to take away his car, to disinherit him because they wanted him to break up with his girlfriend and stop focusing on music and instead focus on his grades. On the 20th of May in 2004, Seth was found guilty of 3 counts of murder. The lesser charge of food contamination was dropped because he was found guilty of these 3 counts of murder. He literally gasped in shock when the verdict was read out. He really did not expect to be going to jail for these murders. Did not expect to be convicted. I wonder if he just didn't realize how bad he was at lying or how obvious it was. They actually did have a psychiatrist come in to talk to him to determine if there was anything wrong with him, if he was fit to stand trial, if he knew what he did was wrong, and he didn't have any mental illnesses and was deemed fit to stand trial. On the 18th of September, just one day after Seth's 24th birthday, he was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole.
I think justice has been done, but it would have been easier to accept if it were a different person. It's just so hard to accept.
Because of this verdict, the lesser charge of food contamination was dropped. He's currently held in Goulburn prison and still to this day claims that he's innocent. The Gonzales family home was sold in November of 2005 for $720,000 to buyers who knew what had happened. And in 2017, the owners of the former Gonzales house actually spoke about life in the house and said they had a really good feeling about the property from the moment that they walked in. And after spending so many happy years in the house, they actually told Women's Day, let me read this. "This is my home. I get really annoyed when people ask about what happened here because it happened before us. I know the Gonzaleses were a good family and would have liked to know we have taken over their home and have been very happy here." And that is all of the information that I have on this case. As always, I would love to discuss your thoughts on this case in the comments down below because it is honestly just so crazy to me. Like, all of the lies that Seth thought that he could get away with, all of these crazy lies that he'd been telling his friends and his family. I would love to hear your thoughts and talk about your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.